Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from the Randy Rogers Band, titled Nothing Shines Like Neon. So as many of you probably know, last year I picked up the collaboration album between two Texas red dirt country acts, both seasoned veterans in the industry who decided to team up and make a record about being seasoned veterans in the country music industry and not quite having struck it gold in the mainstream. Now that record was called Hold My Beer Volume 1 by Randy Rogers and Wade Bowen, and it was, without a doubt, one of my favorite country records of 2015. It was excellent. But what about the men outside of that team up? Well, Wade Bowen has always done things his own way around the indie scene, but Randy Rogers has seen a bit more success with this titular band. And note that when I say success, I mean barely cracking the top 40 with the singles, but steadily building a cult following at the album sales around the late 2000s. And for the life of me, I'm surprised they weren't more successful than they were. Sure, they had more fiddle and steel guitar and texture than your average mainstream country act, but they were signed to a major label and were more willing to cross into rock and pop for their success, to the point where there were a few songs from their 2013 album Trouble that wouldn't sound that out of place on mainstream country radio, except of course that Jay Joyce produced it and it's got all the hallmarks of his clumsy work that he later ruined Eric Church's The Outsiders with a few months later. But the Randy Rogers Band, they never really saw radio airplay. After playing the major label game for several years, they decided just to make their return to the indie scene with their album this year, with promising a more neo-traditional country sound with Nothing Shines Like Neon. Now, I had every reason to believe that this album would be, at worst, pretty damn good, and at best, something really great, something special. So was I right? Well, yeah, it's pretty solid. But really, that's the most I can probably say about it, because while this is definitely a more straightforwardly country Randy Rogers Band album that I'm sure will delight hardcore fans, I'm not exactly getting the same spark that I found with Hold My Beer Volume 1, which is one of the rare examples of the side project eclipsing the main one. I mean, there's a few good songs, a couple duds, guest stars that you would expect for a country band eager to re-establish their indie credentials, but not much beyond that really jumped off the page for me to establish the album beyond a solidly enjoyable listen. In other words, good, but not exactly great. And the odd thing is trying to identify why this album doesn't do more for me. And the first place to start would be our vocalist. Of course, Randy Rogers is a very approachable rasp. It anchors this album, and it's as agreeable and versatile as it was on Hold My Beer Volume 1, which becomes essential given the increased breadth of songwriting topics on this album. But what I found more interesting was how he played in contrast with the other singers. I mean, of course, his backing band provided harmonies, but the duets that spring out more with Jamey Johnson on Actin Crazy and Jerry Jeff Walker on Taking It As They Come. Although I say that neither guest really outshines or even matches Rogers, most because Jamey Johnson sounds a bit more checked out in his verse than he really should, and Jerry Jeff Walker is playing things a little bit too broad with his thicker rasp. Can't exactly say I'm a fan of this guy's voice. Now, what I found a little bit more exasperating is that both Alison Krauss and Dan Tyminski show up to sing on Look Out Yonder, and they don't really feel mixed loud enough to provide more support than just on the hook, which is really a shame. They're playing glorified backing vocals and they're better than that. That's a real disappointment. They're a real waste of talent. Granted, that might be an issue across this album, that takes us to the production. Now, let me stress that in terms of neo-traditional country, this is far from bad. In fact, it's actually quite good. Crisp, breezy drums, solid acoustic and steel guitar, some piano lines to do some subtle heavy lifting, and of course, the great fiddle work from Brady Black that's all over this album, and it's definitely welcome. And this record does push outside of that sound more than I would have expected, with a swampier organ on the R&B tinged Rain in the Radio to the mid-tempo but very agreeable neon blues and Tequila Eyes. Hell, even the stripped back, very middle-aged, adult contemporary inspired love song of Old Moon New had some real power to it thanks to a pretty solid underlying melody that I really liked. But it wasn't until my fourth or maybe my fifth re-listen when I noticed songs like Things I Need to Quit, which normally have a much more textured and fiery guitar line, feel a little bit smoothed over. And once you notice it, you can't stop noticing how many of these songs don't quite have the same acoustic bite or texture. Perhaps a shade too well blended to a very smooth melodic flow that can stick into the mind and go down pretty easy, but can also start to kind of run together, especially if the lyrical hooks aren't really grabbing you. More on this in a bit, but I'm thinking this might be an issue with the producer Buddy Cannon, because if you scan through his production credits, you notice he worked on a lot of Kenny Chesney projects. In other words, it's no surprise that this album lacks an edge or the sharpness to highlight like rougher instrumentation or improvisation. That's not in Kenny Chesney's wheelhouse. Granted, it's not like this album has the solos that the Best Moments of Hold My Beer Volume 1 did have, but it's not like the production would have done much to highlight them if it did. But really, even if the instrumentation does run together, what about the lyrics? Well, here's the thing. Whether or not Randy Rogers writes the songs himself or pulls from other songwriters, you can expect well-written tracks with world-weary framing, in this case most focused on the long term, whether they be long-standing relationships that he's trying to keep fresh on the surprisingly sweet Old Moon New, or the girl is trying to block out her ex at the bar just knowing far too much to do better on Tequila Eyes or on my favorite song Neon Blues. Even if it is just a slightly weaker version of Eric Postley's She Don't Love You. The key enemy is not this ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, it's just time. Long-awaited returns and homecomings on San Antoine or Look Over Yonder. Exes to be left behind in the past from the reckless mess of Things I Need to Quit, or the attempt to reconnect after all those years on Meet Me at Night. That probably frames itself as more romantic than it probably should. Or even just how the crazy musician life over the toll of many years can take a heavy toll on acting crazy or taking as they come. Now, most of this material is not that new or original for the Randy Rogers Band, and that can bet to be a bit of a problem making these songs seem distinctive lyrically. But the larger issue is that many of these songs seem to be a shade away from the nuance and detail that would really drive them home and make them something special and unique. Meet Me Tonight, easiest example. For as much as this ex draws his attention, he's making one desperate plea for him, there's never really the acknowledgement that things are long buried and that there isn't any hope here, which can come across as kind of presumptuous and again, more romantic than it should be. Similar case for Look Over Yonder. I like how it's in the third person picture to his mother that he's coming home and how much he's grown and changed from her being her little boy, but describing himself as having a heart of gold rung is a little bit too self-aggrandizing for me, and the self-deprecation gets pushed a little bit too far too on Pour One Out for the Poor One. A song that's a tad too short to really get to the nuance that this woman gets sick of this guy's drinking, leaves, and now we're supposed to pity him, especially considering that he's tried changing, failed, and now really isn't taking responsibility for it. For as mature as this album can feel, that moment at the very end rung a little bit sour, and it's definitely not the note the album should have ended on, because really, Randy Rogers and his songwriters, they're better than that. But overall, while it's nice to see the Randy Rogers Band independent, making straightforward, neo-traditional country, it doesn't quite have the creative spark or the songwriting to really jump out and become a great record. It is damn good, very listenable, and very likable, and it's getting a very light 7 out of 10 because of that, but I get the impression it's a very safe record. It'll probably go down easy enough, but we'll probably end up getting lost in the shuffle along the way this year. Nice to see you guys back in the indie scene. This was good, but you know what, I get the feeling it could have been great. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. What did you guys think of this album? Do you think it was that too easy, or you guys, is everything you always wanted from the Randy Rogers Band? Well, keep in mind, just my opinion, and I wholeheartedly know that others will wholeheartedly disagree, for whatever that's worth. Until then, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.